offended by black power, anti-white speech as I am against white supremacist speech. The woman and women don't want to hear sort of this misogynist, male-centric, oppressive dominance speech. But it's precisely because we have a right to speak that those rights are preserved, right? People have a right to say things that will offend you, right? And that's the whole point of the right. It's not that you have a right to say what's on your mind. You have a right to say what's on your mind, understanding with the caveat that what you're saying is going to offend some people. Now, granted, there is a distinction, and I'm not going to get into the legal debate, between evoking violence with your speech, hate speech, and the right to speak. I'm not going to make that distinction here. I'll leave that for somebody else to do. The point is, however, the protection of an individual's freedom to speak is precisely to protect the type of speech that I don't want to hear. And I actually believe that they have the right to speak and say the things that they want to say. Obviously, there'll be repercussions for those speeches, right? You're going to incite violence within various populations and such, but you have that right to say things that I don't want to hear, just like other people have rights to say things that you don't want to hear, right? So hopefully that's pretty obvious now, but it's important because, you know, people have a right to speak, people have a right to free speech, and then somebody says something that you don't like and you don't want to hear them say that. You want to get them locked up, or no, that's precisely what free speech protects, right? So the first of FDR's 4 freedom speeches is a right to speech and expression, and that's throughout the world. Number 2 is, the second is freedom of every person to worship God in his or her own way everywhere in the world, right? So right, freedom of worship. I'm not going to put freedom of religion, right, but freedom of worship. The freedom to worship your particular deity in the ways that you see fit, right? Granted, lots of legal caveats with respect to what it is that you might believe and how that relates to your social interaction with others, but generally speaking, individuals have a freedom to worship in the ways that they see fit. Number 3, the third is, and this is pretty interesting, the third is a freedom from want, right? Later I'll make distinctions between freedoms to and freedoms from, but not freedoms, rights to, a right to something, and a right from something. So I'll talk about that later. But the third is a freedom from want. A freedom from want, and this is the citation. A freedom from want, which, quote, translates into world terms, means economic understanding, which will secure to every nation a healthy, peacetime life for its inhabitants everywhere in the world. I'm actually going to spend quite a bit of time talking about this later when we get into notions of development, when we get into notions of health, which is near the end of the lecture. Right? There is an obligation, right? There is a freedom from want, especially when we're talking about food. And I'll talk about the human right to food in this lecture series much later, hours from now. I'll talk about that. But the freedom from want incorporates sort of those things that we need to sustain our lives. These freedoms from want really address the notion, which I'll flesh out later, sustenance. Right? The idea of sustenance, right? A freedom of want addresses the idea of sustenance, sustaining our livelihood, sustaining our existence. And then lastly, the fourth is a freedom from fear. Right? A freedom from fear, which translates into world terms, means the worldwide reduction of armaments to such a point and to such a thorough fashion that no nation will be in a position to commit an act of physical aggression against any neighbor, anywhere in the world. obviously, that's a bit more audacious of a goal to have, right? The freedom from fear. But I think generally understood, the idea of a freedom from fear is a basic understanding that individuals need, individuals have to have, individuals are within a social setting warranted these freedoms, right? Not only are they warranted these freedoms, but since we recognize, and this is a bit deeper now, but since we recognize that these freedoms are a preconditions for human rights, right? Since we recognize that freedom is a precondition to human rights, then these 4 freedoms, with the addition of many, many more, I'm not in any sense saying that there are only 4 freedoms, I'm just giving you a reference, right? But if you follow the logic, if freedom is a precondition to human rights, necessary, not sufficient, right? Right? If we're saying that freedom is a precondition to human rights, and we're saying that the 4 freedoms, contains this larger notion of freedom, right? Then we recognize that the 4 freedoms are also a precondition to human rights, right? So what we've done is we've sort of worked our way backwards in constructing the syllogism by recognizing that the relationship between human rights and freedoms is one of what would be technically known as antecedent dependence. I don't want to get technical, but human rights is conditioned on the precondition of freedom, and that idea of freedom itself can be sort of fleshed out, right? So anything that's fleshed out relates to the idea of human rights. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too difficult. Should make sense. Sort of a domino effect. Number 3. Now I introduced the idea of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in the first hour of the lecture, and I'm not going to go through every single point within the declaration, or article rather. I'm not going to go through every single article within the declaration, but there are certain ones that I want to address specifically now, and as we progress through the series, I'll come back and incorporate more conceptions. But I'm just going to abbreviate it. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So this idea of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, let's look at some of these articles. Article 1, all, generalized term, right? All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. We immediately see in the first article how loaded that first sentence is, and I'm going to go through this actually a bit slowly so that you can understand precisely what's being said, right? Because I think now, we did a little ghetto philosophy in the beginning, but now we can get a little bit deeper, right? I laid the conceptual foundations earlier, and now we can really sort of decipher the significance of each of these terms, right? So first, and I'm not going to write out all of these, but just to get started, all human beings are born free and equal, got it right, free and equal in dignity and rights. Alright, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. The only term we really haven't addressed yet is this idea of dignity. But we've already addressed the idea of freedom. We've already talked about equality. We've talked about rights. So let's see what we have, right? What we recognize is, as we said before, freedom and equality, these two, the only thing that's missing here would be liberty. Right? We said that liberty, freedom, and equality are our requisite preconditions for